Hunting with the Bow and Arrow by Saxton Pope. Read by Rob Banbury. Dedicated to Robin Hood, a spirit that at some time dwells in the heart of every youth.
Chapter 1. The Story of the Last Yana Indian. The glory and romance of archery culminated in England before the discovery of America. There, no doubt, the bow was used to its greatest perfection, and it decided the fate of nations. The crossbow and the matchlock had supplanted the longbow when Columbus sailed for the New World. It was, therefore, a distinct surprise to the first explorers of America that the natives used the bow and arrow so effectively. In fact, the sword and the horse, combined with the white man's superlative self-assurance, won the contest over the aborigines more than the primitive blunderness of the times. The bow and arrow was still more deadly than the gun. With the gradual extermination of the American Indian, the westward march of civilization, and the improvement in firearms, this contest became more and more unequal, and the bow disappeared from the land. The last primitive Indian archer was discovered in California in the year 1911. When the white pioneers of California descended through the northern part of that state by the Lasser Trail, they met with a tribe of Indians known as the Yana or Yahi. That is the name they called themselves. Their neighbors called them the Nazi, and the white men called them the Deer Creek or Mill Creek Indians. Different from other tribes of this territory, the Yana would not submit without a struggle to the white man's conquest of their lands. The Yana were hunters and warriors. The usual California natives were yellow in color, fat, and inclined to be peaceable. The Yana were smaller of stature, lithe, and of a reddish bronze complexion, and instead of being diggers of roots, they lived by the salmon spear and the bow. Their range extended over an area south of Mount Lasser, east of the Sacramento River, for a distance of 50 miles. From the earliest settlement of the whites, hostilities existed between them. This resulted in definitely organized expeditions against these Indians and the annual slaughter of hundreds. The last big roundup of Mill Creek Indians occurred in 1872, when their tribe was surprised at its seasonal harvest of acorns. Upon this occasion, a posse of whites killed such a number of natives that it is said that the creek was dammed with dead bodies. An accurate account of these days may be obtained from the Waterman's papers on the Yana Indians. During one of the final raids upon the Yana, a young band of Indian women and children hid in a cave. Here they were discovered and murdered in cold blood. One of the white scouting party laconically stated that he used his revolver to blow out the brains because the rifle spattered up the cave too much. So it came to pass that from 2,000 or 3,000 people, the Yana were reduced to less than a dozen who escaped extermination. These were mainly women, old men, and children. This tribal remnant sought the refuge of the imperceptible brush and the volcanic rocks of Deer Creek Canyon. Here they lived by stealth and cunning. Like wild creatures, they kept from sight until the whites quite forgot their existence. It became almost a legend that wild Indians lived in the Mount Lasser district. From time to time, ranchers or sheep herders reported that their flocks had been molested, that signs of Indians had been found, or that arrowheads were discovered in their sheep. But little credence was given these rumors until the year 1908, when an electric power company undertook to run a survey line across Deer Creek Canyon with the object of constructing a dam. One evening, as a party of linemen stood on a log at the edge of a deep, swift stream, debating the best place to ford, a naked Indian rose before them, giving a savage snarl and brandishing a spear. In an instant the survey party disbanded, fell from the log, and crossed the stream in record-breaking time. When they stopped to catch their breath, the Indian had disappeared. This was the first appearance of Ishi. Next morning, an exploring expedition set out to verify the excited report of the night before. The popular opinion was that no such wild man existed, and that the linemen had been seeing things. One of the group offered to bet that no sign of Indians would be found. As the explorers reached the slide of volcanic boulders where the apparition of the day before had disappeared, 2 arrows flew past them. They made a run for the top of the slide and reached it just in time to see 2 Indians vanish in the brush. They left behind them an old white-haired squaw whom they'd been carrying. She was partially paralyzed, and her legs were bound with swaths of willow bark, seemingly in an effort to strengthen them. The old squaw was wrinkled with age. Her hair was cropped short as a sign of mourning, and she was trembling with fear. The white men approached and spoke kindly to her in Spanish, but she seemed not to understand their words, and apparently expected only death, for in the past to meet a white man was to die. They gave her water to drink and tried to make her call back her companions, but without avail. Further search disclosed 2 small brush huts hidden among the laurel trees. So cleverly concealed were these structures that one could pass within a few yards and not discern them. In one of the huts, acorns and dried salmon had been stored. The other was their habitation. There was a small hearth for indoor cooking, bows, arrows, fishing tackle, a few aboriginal utensils, and a fur robe were found. These were confiscated in white man's characteristic manner. They then left the place and returned to camp. Next day the party revisited the site, hoping to find the rest of the Indians. These, however, had gone forever. Nothing more was seen or heard of this little band until the year 1911, when on the outskirts of Orville, some 32 miles from the Deer Creek camp, a lone survivor appeared. Early in the morning, brought to bay by a barking dog, huddled in the corner of a corral was an emaciated naked Indian. So strange was his appearance, and so alarmed was the butcher's boy who found him, that a hasty call for the town constable brought out an armed force to capture him. Confronted with guns, pistols, and handcuffs, the poor man was sick with fear. He was taken to the city jail and locked up for safekeeping. There he awaited death. For years he had believed that to fall into the hands of white men meant death. All his people had been killed by whites. No other result could happen. So he waited in fear and trembling. They brought him food, but he would not eat, water, but he would not drink. They asked him questions, but he could not speak. With the simplicity of the white man, they brought him other Indians of various tribes, thinking that surely all diggers were the same, but their language was as strange to him as Chinese or Greek. And so they thought him crazy. His hair was burnt short, his feet had never worn shoes, he had small bits of wood in his nose and ears. He neither ate, drank, nor slept. He was indeed wild or insane. By this time, the news of the wild Indian got into the city papers, and Professor T.T. Waterman of the Department of Anthropology at the University of California was sent to investigate the case. He journeyed to Oroville and was brought into the presence of this strange Indian. Having knowledge of many native dialects, Dr. Waterman tried one after another on the prisoner. Through good fortune, some of the Yana vocabulary had been preserved in the records of the university. Venturing upon this lost language, Waterman spoke in the Yana words, Sewini, which means pine wood, tapping at the same time the edge of the cot on which they sat. In wonderment, the Indian's face lighted up with faint recognition. Waterman repeated the charm, and like a spell the man changed from a cowering, trembling savage. A furtive smile came across his face. He said in his language, I knew Yahi. Are you an Indian? Waterman assured him that he was. A great sense of relief entered the situation. Waterman had discovered one of the lost tribes of California. Ishi had discovered a friend. They clothed him and fed him, and he learned that the white man was good. Since no formal charges were lodged against the Indian, and he seemed to have no objection, Waterman took him to San Francisco, and there, attached to the Museum of Anthropology, he became a subject of study and lived happily for 5 years. From him it was learned that his people were all dead. The old woman seen in the Deer Creek episode was his mother. The old man was his uncle. They died on a long journey to Mount Lasser, soon after their discovery. Here he had burned their bodies and gone into mourning. The fact that the white man took their means of procuring food, as well as their clothing, contributed no doubt to the death of the older people. Half-starved and hopeless, he had wandered into civilization. His father, once the chieftain of the Yana tribe, having domain over all the country immediately south of Mount Lasser, was long since gone, and with him all his people. Ranchers and stockmen had usurped their country, spoiled the fishing, and driven off the game. The acorn trees of the valleys had been taken from them. Nothing remained but evil spirits in the land of his forefathers. Now, however, he had found kindly people who fed him, clothed him, and taught him the mysteries of civilization. When asked his name, he said, I have none, because there were no people to name me, meaning that no tribal ceremony had been performed. But the old people had called him Ishi, which means strong and straight one, for he was one of the youth of their camp. He had learned to make fire with sticks. He knew the lost art of chipping arrowheads from flint and obsidian. He was the fisherman and the hunter. He knew nothing of our modern life. He had no name for iron, nor cloth, nor horse, nor road. He was as primitive as the aborigines of the pre-Columbian period. In fact, he was a man of the Stone Age. He was absolutely untouched by civilization. In him science had a rare find. He turned back the pages of history countless centuries, and so they studied him, and he studied them. From him they learned little of his personal history and less of that of his family, because an Indian considers it unbecoming to speak of his own life, and it brings ill luck to speak of the dead. He could not pronounce the name of his father without calling him from the land of the spirits, and this he could only do for some very important reason. But he knew the full history of his tribe and their destruction. His apparent age was about 40 years, yet he undoubtedly was near 60. Because of his simple life, he was in physical prime, mentally alert, and strong in body. He was about 5 feet 8 inches tall, well proportioned, had beautiful and unspoiled feet. His features were less aquiline than those of the Plains Indian, yet strongly marked outlines. High cheekbones, large intelligent eyes, straight black hair, and fine teeth made him good to look upon. As an artisan, he was very skillful and ingenious, accustomed to the primitive tools of stone and bone. He soon learned to use most expertly the knife, file, saw, vise, hammer, axe, and other modern implements. Although he marveled at many of our inventions and appreciated matches, he took great pride in his ability to make fire with 2 sticks of buckeye. This he could do in less than 2 minutes by twirling one on the other. About this time I became an instructor in surgery at the University Medical School, which is situated next to the museum. Ishi was employed here in a small way as a janitor to teach him modern industry and the value of money. He was perfectly happy and a great favorite with everybody. From his earliest experience with our community life, he manifested little immunity to disease. He contracted all the epidemic infections with which he was brought in contact. He lived a very hygienic existence, having excellent food and sleeping outdoors, but still he was often sick. Because of this, I came in touch with him as a physician in the hospital and soon learned to admire him for the fine qualities of his nature. Though very reserved, he was kindly, honest, cleanly, and trustworthy. More than this, he had a superior philosophy of life and a high moral standard. By degrees, I learned to speak his dialect and spent many hours in his company. He told us of the folklore of his tribe. More than 40 myths and animal stories have been recorded and preserved. They are as interesting as the stories of Uncle Remus. The escapades of the wildcat, the lion, the grizzly bear, the blue jay, the lizard, and the coyote are all as full of excitement and comedy as any fairy story. He knew the history and use of everything in the outdoor world. He spoke the language of the animals. He taught me to make bows and arrows, how to shoot them, and how to hunt, Indian fashion. He was a wonderful companion in the woods, and many days and nights we journeyed together. After he had been with us 3 years, we took him back to his own country, but he did not want to stay. He liked the ways of the white man, and his own land was full of the spirits of the departed. He showed us old forgotten campsites where past chieftains made their villages. He took us to deer licks and ambushes used by his people long ago. One day, in passing the base of a great rock, he scratched with his toe and dug up the bones of a bear paw. Here, in years past, they had killed and roasted a bear. This was the camp of Yamoloku. His own camp was called Wawomopono, Tentna, or Bear Wallow. We swam the streams together, hunted deer and small game, and at night sat under the stars by the campfire, where in a simple way we talked of old heroes, the worlds above, and his theories of life to come in the land of plenty, where the bounding deer and the mighty bear met the hunter with his strong bow and swift arrows. I learned to love Ishi as a brother, and he looked upon me as one of his people. He called me Kuai, or medicine man, more, perhaps, because I could perform sleight of hand tricks than because of my profession. But in spite of the fact that he was happy and surrounded by the most advanced material culture, he sickened and died. Unprotected by hereditary or acquired immunity, he contracted tuberculosis and faded away before our eyes. Because he had no natural resistance, he received no benefit from such hygienic measures as served to arrest the disease in the Caucasian. We did everything possible for him and nursed him to the painful bitter end. When his malady was discovered, plans were made to take him back to the mountains from whence he came, and there have him cared for properly. We hoped, by his return to his natural elements, he would recover, but from the inception of his disease he failed so rapidly that he was not strong enough to travel. Consumed with fever and unable to eat nourishing food, he seemed doomed from the first. After months of misery, he suddenly developed a tremendous pulmonary hemorrhage. I was with him at the time, directed his medication, and gently stroked his hand as a sign of fellowship and sympathy. He did not care for marked demonstration of any sort.
He was a stoic, unafraid, and died in the faith of his people. As an Indian should go, so we sent him on his long journey to the land of shadows. By his side we placed his fire sticks, 10 pieces of denitalia, or Indian money, and a small bag of acorn meal, a bit of dried venison, some tobacco, and his bow and arrows. These were cremated with him, and the ashes placed in an earthen jar. On it is inscribed Ishi, the last Yana Indian, 1916. And so departed the last wild Indian of America. With him the Neolithic epoch terminates. He closes a chapter in history. He looked upon us as sophisticated children, smart but not wise. We knew many things, and much that is false. He knew nature, which is always true. His were the qualities of character that last forever. He was essentially kind. He had courage and self-restraint. And though all had been taken from him, there was no bitterness in his heart. His soul was that of a child, his mind that of a philosopher. With him there was no word for goodbye. He said, "You stay, I go." He has gone, and he hunts with his people. We stay, and he has left us the heritage of the bow.